2:11 a.m. The thirst begins. Why is the water pressure low? It was a small question, spoken into the quiet of an ordinary night. A tap turned once, twice, then released a weak stream that shivered, hesitated, and died into silence. No alarms followed, no sirens warned of what had already begun. Across Riyadh, Dubai, Doha, Kuwait City, Manama, and Muscat, millions slept beneath glowing skylines, unaware that far out along the coastlines, where steel met the sea, something irreversible was unfolding. Desalination plants, those vast unseen machines that turned salt water into life, were collapsing into fire. Towers twisted, pipelines ruptured, control rooms vanished in seconds. But the explosions were only noise. The real catastrophe was silent. By the time the first light touched the glass towers of the Gulf, the water had already begun to disappear, and with it, the fragile illusion that modern cities could never truly fall. At first, the change felt almost imaginary. A slower stream from the tap, a delay in water tanks refilling, a pressure drop so subtle it invited denial. People adjusted as they always did, assuming maintenance, assuming routine disruption. Governments reinforced that belief. Calm announcements filled the airwaves, carefully chosen words designed to hold back panic. Temporary issue, technical fault, water reserves stable. But beneath those words, calculations told a far darker story. The war between Iran and the combined forces of the United States and Israel had already redrawn the region in fire and retaliation, but this moment marked a shift, something colder, more deliberate. In a coordinated strike, Iran had targeted the most vulnerable artery of the Gulf, its water infrastructure. Not oil, not military bases, water. 14 major desalination plants spread across Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait City, Manama, and Muscat had been destroyed or critically damaged. These were not just facilities, they were engineered lifelines. Some produced over 1 million cubic meters of fresh water per day, feeding entire cities. Together, they accounted for a massive portion of the region's supply, up to 90% of potable water in some nations. In a matter of minutes, over 35 million cubic meters of daily freshwater production vanished. The number meant little at first, until the water stopped. The truth did not arrive with an announcement. It revealed itself slowly in the spaces where water should have been. Reservoirs that were designed to last days began to empty faster than expected. Engineers pushed systems beyond their limits, rerouting supply, balancing pressure, delaying collapse by hours at a time. But no amount of engineering could replace what had been lost. Most major cities had reserves designed for 3 to 5 days of consumption, a buffer, not a solution. Behind closed doors, officials watched the numbers fall. There was no recovery plan that worked in time. The first visible crack came not from government, but from the public. Shelves emptied in hours, bottled water disappeared before delivery trucks could unload, prices surged beyond logic, $10, $20, $50 per liter, then became irrelevant. Money could not create water where none existed. Lines stretched for kilometers, arguments turned into fights, trucks were stopped, surrounded, stripped within minutes. "What are we supposed to do?" a man shouted in a crowded street in Kuwait City. "Wait for rain?" But rain never came. Hospitals began to feel the weight of absence in a way that numbers could not capture. Modern medicine is built on water, clean, constant, invisible. Without it, systems unravel. Dialysis units, which require thousands of liters of purified water, were among the first to fail. Surgical procedures halted, sterilization became impossible. Intensive care units designed to preserve life became places of quiet desperation. In Saudi Arabia alone, over 15,000 patients dependent on water-intensive treatments were left without options. A doctor stood in a dimly lit corridor, staring at a patient chart he could no longer act on. "We have the medicine, we just don't have the water." The heat did the rest. In cities where temperatures climb beyond 45 degrees Celsius, water is not comfort, it is survival. Without it, the human body begins to fail within days. Dehydration spread invisibly at first, then all at once. Children collapsed in schools, workers fell in the streets, the elderly died quietly behind closed doors. Emergency systems were overwhelmed before they could adapt. In the UAE, more than 120,000 severe dehydration cases were reported within days of widespread shortages. But the crisis did not stop there. Water is also the foundation of sanitation. When it disappears, everything built upon it collapses. Sewage systems backed up, waste flooded streets, pipelines once protected by pressure became vulnerable to contamination. What little water remained turned dangerous. Bacteria spread rapidly: cholera, dysentery, typhoid. In Bahrain, infection rates climbed to over 10% of the population within a matter of days. In Qatar, hospitals already strained by dehydration cases were overwhelmed with disease. Don't drink it, people warned each other. But thirst does not listen. Deaths came quietly at first, then faster, then too many to count. Official numbers rose past 100,000 deaths across the region, but they lagged behind reality. Countless lives were lost without record, inside homes, installed vehicles, in overcrowded shelters where water was shared in drops. Mass graves began to appear on the edges of cities, not because of bombs, because of thirst. What made the crisis truly irreversible was the destruction itself. Desalination plants are not easily repaired. They are vast, complex systems, integrating energy, filtration, and precision engineering at a scale few industries can match. A single large facility can cost between $1 billion and $7 billion to build. Even under ideal conditions, construction takes 3 to 5 years. But these were not ideal conditions. Ports were under threat, supply chains were broken, skilled engineers had fled, insurance systems collapsed. No company was willing to operate inside an active war zone. Experts estimated that restoring even half of the destroyed capacity would take 5 to 8 years. Full recovery could take more than a decade. And until then, there would be no stability. Alternatives failed quickly. Groundwater reserves, already strained from decades of overuse, were pushed beyond their limits. Within weeks, salinity levels rose sharply, rendering much of it undrinkable. Emergency imports were discussed, calculated, attempted, but the scale was impossible. Sustaining a country like Saudi Arabia would require over 20,000 tanker deliveries per day. No system could support that, not in peace, certainly not in war. The cities began to empty. Not all at once, but steadily, like a tide pulling back. Highways filled with vehicles carrying families, supplies, hope. Many never reached their destination. Fuel ran out. Engines failed. Cars were abandoned under a sun that offered no mercy. Borders tightened as neighboring regions struggled with their own shortages. Refugee camps expanded rapidly, often without clean water or sanitation, accelerating the spread of disease. The crisis was no longer contained. It was spreading. Economically, the collapse was immediate and global. Gulf economies contracted by 40 to 60% within weeks. Oil production declined sharply, not from lack of reserves, but from lack of water needed for processing and cooling. Global energy prices surged beyond $200 per barrel, triggering a worldwide economic shock. But for those living through it, these numbers meant nothing. The only number that mattered was how many leaders remained. And then, the numbers stopped mattering at all. Because by the time the death toll crossed 500,000, then 800,000, then over 1 million, counting no longer changed anything. Cities once defined by innovation and wealth became silent structures, intact but empty. Glass towers reflected sunlight on streets where no one walked. Infrastructure remained, but life did not. A soldier standing near the ruins of a desalination plant looked out at the sea and said quietly, "We always thought water was endless." But it wasn't. Years later, if reconstruction ever truly began, the cost of rebuilding water infrastructure alone would exceed $500 billion. Partial recovery might take 5 to 8 years, full restoration 10 years or more. But rebuilding structures is easier than rebuilding lives. In the end, history would not remember the complexity of the war or the strategies that led to it. It would remember something far simpler, a moment repeated across millions of homes, a hand reaching for a tap, turning it slowly, waiting for something that had always been there, and finding nothing. Because in that silence, the world learned a truth more terrifying than any weapon, that the greatest power in modern conflict is not destruction, but the removal of what keeps us alive.